The moment Colt stepped onto the subway platform at Spadina Station, he already knew something was wrong. He didn't know how he knew. He never did. After 12 years in the Navy, 4 deployments, and 2 tours doing things that would never appear in any official report, the feeling had become as natural as breathing. A tightening behind the sternum, a shift in peripheral vision, the body cataloging threats before the mind had a chance to name them. He adjusted the strap of his duffel bag and looked down at Ranger. The German shepherd sat perfectly still beside him, ears forward, nose working the cold underground air. Ranger weighed 34 kilograms of pure military conditioning, but right now he looked like someone's well-behaved pet. That was the point. Colt had spent 2 weeks' leave in Toronto visiting his younger sister, Meredith, and he'd spent most of it trying to look like a regular person. Normal jacket, regular jeans, a dog on a leash. He almost pulled it off. The northbound train arrived at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in February. The platform was sparse. A woman in scrubs holding a coffee, an older Sikh man with a briefcase, a teenage boy with headphones the size of satellite dishes. Colt let them board first. Old habit. He scanned the car through the glass before stepping in. 4 men were already inside. They were sitting near the back. Loud. The kind of loud that isn't about being heard. It's about being noticed. One of them had his boots up on the seat across from him. Another was eating chips from a bag, letting the crumbs fall wherever they landed. They wore matching hoodies. Not the same color, but the same blank, deliberate expression that said, "We go together." Colt found a seat near the middle of the car and sat down. Ranger settled between his feet without being told. The doors closed. The train moved. For 6 stops, nothing happened. Colt watched the tunnel lights blur past the window. He thought about his sister's cooking, about the flight back to Virginia in the morning, about whether he'd left his shaving kit at Meredith's apartment, or if it was already in the duffel. Then one of the 4 men stood up. He was the tallest of the group. Maybe 6'2", broad across the shoulders, with a jaw that looked like it had been hit more than once, and had learned nothing from the experience. He moved down the aisle with his hands loose at his sides. He stopped at the older Sikh man first. "Hey!" He snapped his fingers. "Wallet." The man looked up slowly. His name was Harjit. Colt would learn that later. Right now, Harjit looked at the young man standing over him and made a quiet calculation that most people in that situation make. This isn't worth dying for. He reached into his jacket pocket. The tall man took the wallet, flipped it open, pulled out the bills, and dropped the wallet on the floor. He moved to the woman in scrubs, next. She handed over her phone without being asked. Then he reached the teenager with the headphones. The boy had them half off by now, eyes wide. The music still faintly audible. The tall man grabbed the headphones off entirely and tossed them aside. Took the phone. Took the small amount of cash in the front pocket. Then he got to Colt. Colt was looking out the window. "You deaf?" the tall man said. Colt didn't answer right away. He let 1 full second pass. Then he turned his head slowly and looked at the man standing over him. "No," Colt said. "Then you heard me." The tall man held out his hand. "Wallet, phone, watch." Colt looked at the outstretched hand. He looked at the 3 other men who had moved up the aisle now, flanking. Basic formation. He noticed the small tattoo on the tall man's wrist, a stylized letter overlapping a crown. He filed it away. "I'm going to ask you to step back," Colt said. His voice was the same temperature it had been discussing Meredith's pasta bake 2 hours earlier. The tall man laughed. It was a performance laugh. He turned back to his crew and grinned. "He's going to ask me," he said. One of the others, a shorter man with a shaved head, Colt had already clocked him as the one to watch. The one with restless hands laughed too. But his eyes didn't laugh. His eyes were measuring. "Dog's nice," the tall man said, looking down at Ranger. "Big dog. Shame if it got." He swung his boot toward Ranger's side. He didn't connect. Ranger moved. Not a lunge. A precise sidestep. Weight shifted. Spine low. A sound emerging from deep in his chest that was not quite a bark and not quite a growl, but something older than both. Every person in the car went very still. The tall man's boot connected with empty air, and the momentum threw him slightly forward. He stumbled. Just a centimeter. Just enough. Colt stood up. He didn't reach for anything. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood up, which brought him to the same height as the tall man, and something in how he did it, unhurried, completely without fear, made the air in the subway car change pressure. There are people who have learned to be dangerous, and then there are people who simply are dangerous. The difference is invisible until it isn't. Last time, Colt said. Step back. The short man with restless hands made a decision. He reached into his hoodie pocket. Colt moved before the hand came out. It was not a dramatic movement. There was no winding up, no Hollywood telegraphing. 1 second he was standing still, and the next his hand was around the short man's wrist. Not gripping it, exactly, just redirecting it. And the short man found himself turning in a direction he had not chosen to turn. And then he found himself seated, on the floor of the moving subway car, with his own arm bent at an angle that was not quite painful yet, but communicated very clearly that it was one small decision away from being extremely painful. The remaining three looked at their companion on the floor. Ranger stood between Colt and the tall man, perfectly still, watching. The tall man made a different calculation than Harjit had made. "You don't know what you just did," he said. "I know exactly what I did," Colt said. "Sit down, all of you, until Blore Young." They sat. What the four men on that subway car didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that the tall man's name was Troy. And Troy had a brother named Felix, who ran a private waste removal company out of Mississauga. And Felix had a very quiet, very profitable side arrangement with a city councillor named Morris Aldgate. The arrangement was simple. Aldgate steered municipal contracts Felix's way. Felix paid generously for that steering. And when anyone asked questions about where certain waste removal contracts had gone and why, two particular officers in 52 Division had a habit of finding reasons to look elsewhere. The four men on the subway were Troy's errand crew. They weren't running a sophisticated operation. They were running the kind of visible, aggressive street presence that reminded the neighborhood who had permission to operate on which corners. Fear is infrastructure. It keeps things running. They had no idea that a Navy SEAL had just put one of them on the floor. At Blore Young, a transit officer boarded. Her name was Simone. She was 51 years old, 11 years on the job, and she had seen enough in those 11 years to know when something had already happened in a subway car. Before she arrived, she looked at the four men sitting in a row. She looked at the man standing near the door with his large dog. She looked at Harjit, who gave her a very small but very deliberate nod. "Everyone okay here?" she said. "No," Harjit said. He said it quietly and firmly. He pointed at the man in the aisle. "He took my wallet, and the young ladies tried to." He paused, choosing the word carefully. "He tried to harm the dog." Troy looked at Colt. "You going to let an old man talk for you? He doesn't need my help," Colt said. Simone called it in. What happened next took about 40 minutes and a lot of paperwork. Colt sat in the brightly lit transit control office on the lower level of Blore Young and answered the Toronto police officer's questions in the same flat, factual tone he used when debriefing. Name. Rank. Purpose of visit. What occurred. In what sequence. He didn't editorialize. He didn't embellish. Facts moved from his mouth into a notebook at a steady, unhurried pace. At some point a sergeant arrived. Her name was Felicity. She was compact and precise, and she looked at Colt across the table, with the specific expression of someone trying to figure out what they were dealing with. "You're on leave," she said. 10 days. Flight back tomorrow morning, and you just happen to be on the northbound line at midnight. My sister lives on DuPont. I was heading back to my hotel." Felicity looked at Ranger, who was lying under the table with his chin on his paws. "Military dog? Was. Now he's mine," she wrote something down. "The man you restrained, he's saying excessive force. His wrist will be fine in the morning," Colt said. Felicity almost smiled. She didn't quite manage it. The tattoo you described. The overlapping letter and crown. You're sure about that? I'm sure. She wrote something else. Longer this time. Then she put her pen down and looked at him directly. We've been trying to get a lead on that crew for 8 months. They operate out of a storage unit in Etobicoke, but they're insulated. Every time we get close, the paperwork goes sideways. That's a familiar story, Colt said. You know anything about the man at the top of that particular food chain? I didn't until tonight, but I know how to find out. She studied him for a moment. You said your flight's tomorrow morning. It was. There was a pause. I could make a call, Felicity said carefully, and get you access to some things, unofficially. I'd need 48 hours, Colt said. You'd need to stay well inside the lines. Always do. They looked at each other across the table. The kind of look shared between two people who understand that some problems require a specific kind of patience to solve. Colt didn't sleep that night. He spread what he had across the small desk in his hotel room near King and Bathurst. Printouts Felicity had sent to a secure address, plus what he could find through his own channels, the ones that technically didn't exist. Ranger lay on the floor nearby. His eyes were open. The waste company was called Lakeshore Environmental Solutions. On paper, it was spotless. Certified, bonded, insured. 11 city contracts in the past 3 years, all won through proper tender processes. On paper. What wasn't on paper was the storage facility in Etobicoke that Felicity had mentioned. And what wasn't anywhere, at first, was the connection to Morris Aldgate. It took Colt 4 hours to find it. It was a numbered company, registered in 2019 to a holding address in Oakville. The holding company had 2 directors, a name Colt didn't recognize, and a name he almost missed because it was buried 3 layers deep in incorporation documents. A maiden name, Morris Aldgate's wife, before she became Morris Aldgate's wife. He wrote the name on a piece of hotel notepad paper. He sat back and looked at it. Ranger lifted his head. Yeah, Colt said. That's what I thought. The storage facility was on a commercial strip off Kipling, sandwiched between an auto parts store and a vacant lot that still had the rusted skeleton of a construction fence around it. Unremarkable. That was the whole point. Unremarkable things don't get looked at twice. Colt sat in a rented Jeep across the street for 2 hours. He counted arrivals and departures. He noted shift patterns. He watched a panel van leave at 6 a.m. and come back at 7:40 a.m. He photographed plates. Ranger sat in the back seat with the window cracked 2 inches, cataloging the air. At 8:15 a.m., Felix arrived. Colt knew it was Felix from the photograph Felicity had included. Late 40s, heavy through the chest. A man who had spent 20 years doing physical work and then stopped and hadn't adjusted his eating to reflect that. He drove a silver Escalade with tinted windows and parked it with the careful deliberateness of someone who values their possessions. He went inside. Colt noted the time. He called Felicity. I have plates, he said, and I have something on the money trail. I'm going to need your contact at Financial Crimes. This is moving fast, she said. It was already moving. We're just catching up to it. There was a pause. He could hear her thinking. The Crown Attorney's office is going to want everything documented. It will be, and you need to stay. Inside the lines. I heard you the first time. Morris Aldgate held a press conference that Thursday afternoon in front of City Hall. He was promoting a new waterfront development initiative. He stood at the podium in a navy blue coat and spoke about community investment and the future of Toronto's lakefront with the practiced warmth of a man who had been doing this for 15 years. People applauded. 3 hours later, officers from the Financial Crimes Unit executed a search warrant on Lakeshore Environmental Solutions registered office. They found what Colt had found in his hotel room, and several things Colt hadn't found because he hadn't had access to the company's internal servers, which the warrant now provided. The numbered company, the holding address, the contracts, and a series of wire transfers that went from Lakeshore to a law firm in Oakville to a personal account in Morris Aldgate's wife's name. Morris found out about the warrant at 6:17 p.m. He was still in the building when his phone rang. By 6:45 p.m., 2 officers were waiting for him in the lobby. Troy was arrested the following morning. His 3 companions from the subway were picked up before noon. The short man with the restless hands turned out to have an outstanding warrant from a separate matter in Hamilton. The process moved efficiently once it started moving. Harjit gave a statement. So did the woman in scrubs, whose name turned out to be Pauline, not the Pauline in the names file, a different Pauline. A pediatric nurse who had been heading home after a double shift and who said in her statement that she had never been so frightened or so relieved in the same 20 minutes of her life. The teenager with the headphones had already posted a video to his account. It had been filmed on his phone, which Troy had taken and then discarded when Colt stood up. He'd dropped it under a seat without noticing. The footage was shaky and dim and lasted 90 seconds, but it showed enough. By the time Colt boarded his rescheduled flight at Pearson on Friday morning, the video had been viewed 400,000 times. He didn't know that. He was already past security, moving through the terminal with his duffel over one shoulder and Ranger heeled precisely at his left side. A woman at a coffee kiosk looked at the dog and smiled. There's a particular kind of quiet that follows action. Not the quiet of emptiness, the quiet of things having settled into their right shape. It doesn't feel like victory. It doesn't feel like much of anything. At first, it just feels like breathing normally again. Colt found his gait. He sat down. Ranger lay down with his muzzle on Colt's boot. He thought about Meredith. She'd texted him 3 times since the video started circulating. The last message just said, "Only you." 2 words. He could hear exactly how she'd said it. Equal parts exasperated and proud. He thought about Harjit, who had looked at him in the transit control office with the kind of gratitude that's almost embarrassing to receive, because it's too large for any room to hold comfortably, who had shaken his hand with both of his and said, very quietly, "Thank you for staying." He hadn't stayed. Not originally. He'd been heading back to his hotel. But something had made him give Felicity his number. Something had made him spread those papers across the desk at midnight instead of going to sleep. Something had made him sit in a rented Jeep in the February cold for 2 hours watching a storage unit in Etobicoke. He knew what the something was. He'd known it for 12 years. It was the same thing that had made him raise his hand for SEAL training at 22. The same thing that had made him re-enlist twice. The same thing that lived in Ranger too, in every quiet moment before the moment wasn't quiet anymore. It wasn't duty. Duty was the reason you put on the uniform in the morning. This was different. This was the thing underneath duty. It was the simple, stubborn refusal to look away. The gate agent announced boarding for the 9:20 to Washington Dulles. Colt picked up his duffel. Ranger stood without being told. They walked toward the gate together. Some people are dangerous in the way a weapon is dangerous, aimed by someone else, useful for a specific purpose, returned to its case when the work is done. Colt wasn't that kind of dangerous. He was dangerous the way a lighthouse is dangerous to the things that shouldn't be near the shore. He didn't seek out the dark. He just made it very hard for the dark to pretend it wasn't there. The narrator leaves him at the gate, boarding pass scanned, dog at his side, face already composed into the neutral patience of a man accustomed to long journeys, and lets the rest go unsaid. Some stories don't need an ending, they just need a door, and he walked through it.